Well, the Gospel of Mark that we just read, what in the world kind of ending was that? That's it? This ends the Gospel of Mark. That's how you're going to end the great story of the resurrection? It seems like kind of a terrible ending. Imagine a movie ending like this. Now, I had to think of a movie as the example where we all know the ending, so that the one thing you come away with this Easter isn't that Pastor ruined Hunger Games for me, or whatever. So I'm choosing Titanic, because we know that ending, whether we've seen it or not. The ship sinks. At any rate, imagine the drama of that movie, Titanic. The buildup, the progression of that narrative. It goes up, up, and up, and up. And then finally the scene. The ship violently hits the massive iceberg. The water begins to rush into the vessel through the gash. And the crew members in the wheelhouse look at each other and they look at the captain. And the credits come up. End of movie. A bit unfinished, right? That's kind of my feeling with this final scene here in the book of Mark. The whole of Mark, which we have been tracking since the first days of Epiphany, right after Christmas. The whole of Mark has built up, and up, especially to this very point. Jesus' dramatic and radical ministry has taken place. He's hinted and he's stated outright his predictions of his own death. He's gone through his arrest, his torture, his trial, the crucifixion, the death, the burial, and the women all arrive at the tomb and it's empty. He is not here. And the women flee and they say nothing to anyone. The end. That's our big Easter story? We filled our sanctuary for that? Thanks a lot, Mark. What about the post-resurrection appearances that you get in all the other Gospels? What about Jesus telling his disciples so beautifully at the end of Matthew to go and baptize all nations and that he will be with them to the very end of the age? None of that here in Mark. What about Jesus embracing doubting Thomas in the Gospel of John? What about Jesus ascending into heaven? Also, wait, where is Jesus? He doesn't even make an appearance here in Mark's resurrection story. One biblical commentator, Dr. David Lose, writes, Mark seems to botch this ending completely. So they fled the tomb and they said nothing to anyone? It all seems so unfinished, perhaps even problematic. These women disciples, they were explicitly told at the tomb, don't be afraid. Now go and tell. What do? They become afraid. They say nothing to anyone. The end. Now it sounds like I'm throwing these female disciples under the bus, but let's be really clear. At least they showed up to the tomb. There aren't any male disciples in sight. The male disciples bailed long before the women. Remember the days leading up to Jesus' death. Peter and Judas and every other male disciple were tragically unreliable. So I agree with the biblical scholar Dr. Marianne Tolbert, who writes that just by showing up to the tomb to pay their respects, these women followers already show themselves to be better disciples of Jesus than those who had already fled, betrayed, and denied. Nevertheless, folks, here we are. We have a seemingly unfinished ending. The risen Jesus isn't anywhere in sight, and there are disciples failing everywhere. The male disciples deserted Jesus, and the women disciples fled the empty tomb not knowing what to do. How is Mark's Easter story good news? Well, wait a minute. Wait a minute. I did forget to highlight one disciple in this Easter story of Mark who does deserve our attention. And regarding this particular disciple, I must again rely on Dr. Lose, who writes this, and I quote, "It appears we're in a bind. All the people who should know about the resurrection don't, and those who do can't be counted on except there is one other person who has seen and heard everything that Jesus has said and done. There's one other disciple who heard Jesus' predictions and then watched as they came true. There's one other disciple who listened to the amazing news at the empty tomb and heard the order to go and tell. Do you know who that person is? It's you and me." End quote. Pretty incredible. You and I are now the disciples to affirm the resurrection, to tell the world of Jesus and his love, to invite people here and to show people Jesus out there with compassion and kindness and mercy and grace. Oh, and where is the risen Jesus? In Mark's account, he doesn't make an appearance. Well, he's right here. He's within you, and he is within me. He is within the place he promised to be within, his community, that hears of his resurrection and is called to go live it now out there. Oh, and Mark's unfinished ending. Maybe that was the whole point. Maybe his Easter story is unfinished because God's grace for and presence in this world has no end. Not even death can put a stop to it. So friends, that's the good news, that Jesus rises again in each of us, and you and I get to go show and tell the world of this endless love. We filled our sanctuary for that. Maybe Mark isn't so terrible at endings after all. Amen.